May 16th, 2012, Amanda Grantham leaned against the balcony railing, the soft breeze carrying the scent of ocean salt and jasmine from the potted plants nearby. The lively hum of Santa Monica streets below blended with the clinking of glasses and muted laughter from the cafe behind her. It felt surreal, this moment of calm and victory. Her Uncle Robert's inheritance, a staggering $2.8 million, had not just changed her financial situation, it had rewritten her narrative. "Cheers to your freedom," Elise said, raising her glass. Elise, Amanda's best friend and confidant, had stood by her side through the turbulent years of her marriage to Charles. "To new beginnings," Amanda replied, her smile genuine but tinged with melancholy. The scars of her marriage to Charles, though faded, hadn't disappeared. Amanda recalled the suffocating control Charles had wielded over her. The perfectionist doctor demanded excellence in everything: his work, his home, and his wife. At first, she had been captivated by his charm and intellect, but over the years, the man she once admired became a tyrant who viewed her as an extension of his ego rather than a partner. While Amanda basked in her newfound independence, Charles sat in his study, scrolling through her social media updates with growing agitation. The dim light from his phone illuminated his sharp features, the deep creases on his forehead a testament to his mounting frustration. Charles had always prided himself on his ability to control the uncontrollable. As a cardiologist, he manipulated life and death with precision, but his personal life was another matter. His financial empire was crumbling under the weight of malpractice lawsuits, poor investments, and the extravagant lifestyle he refused to abandon. Learning of Amanda's windfall felt like a personal affront. He had dismissed her as weak and incapable, yet here she was, thriving without him. The $2.8 million she inherited was a lifeline he desperately needed, but it was out of his reach, and it enraged him. "That money should have been mine," Charles muttered, pouring another scotch as his mind raced. He had spent years building a facade of perfection, but the cracks were widening. His colleagues whispered about his short temper and sloppy work. His once flourishing practice was now a shadow of its former self. The anger in Charles simmered until it coalesced into something darker. He thought of Amanda's smile, her laughter echoing in his mind like a taunt. He picked up a pen and began jotting down ideas on a notepad, his handwriting neat but menacing. Amanda's phone buzzed later that evening with a notification, a photo of her and Elise from the cafe. The caption read, "Here's to new beginnings." She hesitated before posting it, knowing Charles might see it, but then she thought, let him. Across town, Charles stared at the post, his jaw tightening. The glass in his hand trembled slightly before he hurled it against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Later that night, Amanda strode along the Santa Monica Pier, the glow of the Ferris wheel reflecting on the dark water. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Charles, however, was far from peaceful. He sat in his car, parked on a quiet street near Amanda's home, his mind spiraling deeper into darkness. The faint hum of the radio did little to drown out the cacophony of his thoughts. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he watched the lights in her house flicker off one by one. Charles's grip on reality was slipping, and in that moment, a seed of malice took root, a plan to reclaim what he believed was his. Charles Grantham stared at the blank notepad on his desk. The pristine paper seemed to mock him, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing in his mind. The walls of his study felt like they were closing in, filled with echoes of Amanda's laughter and the smug look on her face as she flaunted her newfound freedom. He had always been the orchestrator, the man in control, yet here he was, helpless while Amanda thrived. He needed to act. No longer could he sit idly while the world watched him crumble. Amanda's inheritance wasn't just a windfall, it was his salvation. But if she wouldn't willingly share it, he would take it by force. Charles spent hours that night researching. His medical expertise became a weapon as he combed through articles and journals, meticulously studying substances that could mimic natural deaths. The plan began to take shape, each detail calculated to leave no trace back to him. The first step was surveillance. Charles needed to know Amanda's every move, her vulnerabilities, and her routines. The following morning, he contacted Blake Marston, a private investigator known for discretion and a lack of moral scruples. Blake's office reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap coffee. The investigator, a wiry man with hawk-like eyes, listened intently as Charles outlined what he needed. Follow her. I want to know everything. Her habits, her relationships, where she keeps her money, Charles instructed, sliding an envelope stuffed with $100 bills across the desk. Blake's thin lips curled into a smirk as he pocketed the money. Consider it done, Doc. I'll have a full report by the end of the week. As days turned into weeks, Blake's updates arrived like clockwork. Amanda's life, once a mystery, was now laid bare before Charles. She jogged at Griffith Park every morning, frequented a trendy yoga studio, and often dined at the same cafe in West Hollywood. Most importantly, she had a new boyfriend, Lucas Stanton. The news of Lucas sent Charles into a rage. A former athlete turned financial advisor, Lucas was everything Charles wasn't: charming, carefree, and deeply loved by Amanda. One evening, Charles sat in his study, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand as he stared at a photo of Amanda and Lucas at a restaurant. The sight of her smiling so freely, her hand resting on Lucas's, was unbearable. She thinks she's moved on, Charles muttered to himself, his voice low and venomous. But she hasn't escaped me. Charles's plan took its final shape when he realized Amanda trusted him just enough to meet. He rehearsed his words, crafting a narrative that would convince her he had changed, that he regretted the pain he caused. The key was to strike a balance between vulnerability and sincerity, enough to disarm her, but not enough to make her suspicious. On a Sunday evening, Charles called Amanda. The sound of her voice, cautious but polite, sent a chill down his spine. "Charles," she said hesitantly. "Hello, Amanda," he began, his tone measured. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching, and I realize how much I've hurt you. I'd like to make amends. Please, let's meet. One conversation is all I ask." Amanda was silent for a moment, and Charles could almost hear her weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. "All right, Charles, but this is the last time." As he hung up the phone, Charles allowed himself a rare smile. The pieces were falling into place. He chose a secluded estate owned by a former patient, ensuring privacy for what he intended to do. The week before their meeting, Charles meticulously prepared the tools he needed: a syringe filled with a rare, undetectable drug, gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, a plan to stage the scene as an accidental overdose. By the time the day arrived, Charles was ready. He dressed in his usual tailored suit, the image of calm professionalism, but beneath the surface, his mind churned with anticipation. As Amanda drove to the estate that evening, Charles stood by the window, watching the driveway with a cold, detached gaze. He was no longer a husband, a doctor, or even a man. He was a predator, and his prey was walking straight into his trap. The evening air was heavy with an eerie stillness as Amanda's car pulled into the long driveway of the secluded estate. Towering trees lined the path, their branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly against the dusky sky. Amanda parked her car and stepped out, clutching her phone tightly. Her floral dress fluttered in the faint breeze, but the unease pooling in her stomach outweighed the beauty of the surroundings. Charles greeted her at the door with a warm, almost disarming smile. He looked polished as always, his tailored suit and calm demeanor betraying none of the darkness lurking within. "Amanda," he said, his tone rich with feigned sincerity, "thank you for coming." Amanda forced a polite smile. "Let's get this over with, Charles." Inside, the estate was every bit as opulent as Amanda had expected, but something about it felt lifeless. Too perfect. Too still. Charles led her to a sitting room where an elegant arrangement of wine glasses and a decanter awaited on a glass table. "I thought we could toast to closure," he said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. Amanda hesitated. "I don't think drinking is necessary." Let's just talk. Charles's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. Of course. I just want you to feel comfortable. The conversation began with pleasantries, superficial apologies, and carefully chosen words. Charles painted himself as a man changed by reflection, eager to make amends. Amanda, though wary, found herself softening slightly. As the minutes ticked by, Charles deftly steered the conversation toward Amanda's inheritance. He framed it as concern for her well-being, but his true intentions seeped through. You've done well for yourself, he said, his eyes lingering on her face. That money could open a lot of doors, if handled properly. Amanda's guard shot up. Charles, if this is about the inheritance, we're done here. She stood, but the room swayed beneath her feet. A sudden wave of dizziness swept over her, and her knees buckled. What's happening? She slurred, clutching the arm of the couch. Charles was at her side in an instant, his expression now cold and calculating. It's just a little something to help you relax, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Amanda's body slumped against the couch, her breathing shallow, her eyes filled with terror and confusion locked onto Charles's face. I trusted you, she whispered, her words barely audible. Charles knelt beside her, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. You never should have. But don't worry, you won't feel a thing. From his pocket, he retrieved a syringe filled with a colorless liquid, a rare drug he had meticulously chosen for its ability to mimic a heart attack. As he injected the substance into her arm, Amanda's body jerked slightly before going still. Charles sat back, watching her chest rise and fall slower and slower until it stopped altogether. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of a nearby clock. Charles exhaled deeply, his mind racing through the next steps. He donned gloves and methodically wiped down every surface he had touched. He placed Amanda's phone beside her on the couch, open to a fake search for symptoms of a heart attack. A bottle of prescription pills, purchased under a false name, was left half empty on the coffee table. Satisfied, Charles scanned the room one last time before slipping out into the night. He drove back to Beverly Hills with a chilling sense of calm, convinced he had committed the perfect crime. As he poured himself a celebratory scotch, he whispered to himself, You should have stayed in line. Amanda's lifeless body was discovered the following morning by the estate's caretaker. The scene, meticulously staged by Charles, initially pointed to an accidental overdose. However, Detective Laura Hayes of the LAPD's Homicide Division was not one to take appearances at face value. The call came just after sunrise, and by mid-morning Hayes stood in the opulent sitting room, surveying the grim scene. I lay on the couch, her face pale and peaceful, the prescription bottle within arm's reach, but something about the scene felt off. Hayes's keen eyes scanned the room. Pill bottle on the table, but no water glass nearby, she muttered. And no signs of struggle. Too neat for an accidental overdose. The coroner's preliminary report revealed faint bruising on Amanda's arm, consistent with an injection. This, coupled with a toxicology report indicating a rare medically administered drug, raised immediate red flags. Detective Hayes began piecing together Amanda's final days. Interviews with her friends revealed her recent interaction with Charles, including the mysterious meeting at the estate. A search of Charles's phone records showed he had called Amanda several times in the days leading up to her death. When Hayes visited Charles's Beverly Hills home, she found the once polished doctor. He answered her questions with calm confidence, maintaining his innocence while framing Amanda's death as a tragic accident. I was just trying to make amends, Charles said, his tone measured. We talked, she drank some wine, and we parted ways. I had no idea she overdosed, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with the faintest trace of anxiety. The turning point came when Hayes uncovered surveillance footage from traffic cameras near the estate. The footage captured Charles's car leaving the property late that evening. Furthermore, Amanda's autopsy revealed traces of a substance rarely available outside of hospitals, one that matched inventory records from Charles's clinic. The final blow came when Blake Marston, the private investigator Charles had hired, stepped forward. Feeling betrayed after Charles failed to pay him fully, Marston provided records of his surveillance, including photos of Amanda and Lucas, and detailed reports that hinted at Charles's growing obsession. With this evidence, Hayes obtained a warrant for Charles's arrest. It was a crisp morning when the LAPD arrived at Charles's home. Charles was in his study, sipping coffee and reading a medical journal when officers entered with handcuffs. "Dr. Charles Grantham, you're under arrest for the murder of Amanda Grantham," Hayes said firmly, locking eyes with him. Charles's composed mask shattered. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof," he shouted, but his protests fell on deaf ears as officers escorted him out. The trial was a media spectacle, drawing national attention. The prosecution painted Charles as a controlling narcissist who couldn't bear to see Amanda succeed without him. Witnesses testified to his temper and manipulative behavior, while forensic experts detailed the damning evidence. The defense argued that Amanda's death was an accident, but Charles's cold demeanor on the stand undermined their case. When the private investigator testified about Charles's surveillance and obsession, the courtroom fell silent. It was the final nail in Charles's coffin. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Charles guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Charles sat motionless, his once pristine reputation reduced to ash. Amanda's family and friends wept quietly, finding solace in the justice served. Charles was sent to a maximum security prison where he became a cautionary tale among inmates. A man who had everything but let greed and jealousy destroy him. Amanda's friends established a foundation in her memory, helping victims of domestic abuse and controlling relationships find safety and independence. Detective Hayes, now promoted, kept a photo of Amanda on her desk, a reminder of the lives she fought to protect and the darkness she worked tirelessly to expose.